In tonight's Government Insider, the forecast for DoD service contracts. Pentagon spending is a lot like the weather. It can be hard to predict what's coming down the pike as Congress battles over budgets and lurches from one appropriation cycle to the next. Amidst all the uncertainty, the Pentagon needs to plan years in advance. That can be a logistical nightmare. But how much planning is really going on? For answers, I'm joined by Tim DiNapoli, Director of Acquisition and Sourcing Management Issues with the Government Accountability Office. Tim, you just released a study on Pentagon spending over the past 5 years. Before we get to the results, give us a few definitions. What's the difference between service contracts and product contracts? How much does DoD spend on each?
Well, Morris, when I think of products in the Department of Defense, I think of big things. I think of very expensive and things that go boom. So I think of tanks and fighter planes and bombers and aircraft carriers. Things that get the direct personal attention of the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Military Departments. All the processes in DoD are designed to make sure that those acquisitions go as smoothly as possible. And you know, they don't always work that way. Now, when I think of services, I am buying expertise. I want somebody way smarter than me who can fix my computer, who is an engineer who can look at that weapon system design and tell me if it's going to work, and who can have some business smarts and can tell me whether or not my proposal makes sense. So big differences. The other difference is that services tend to be much smaller, and they're not as pricey, not as expensive, and they're bought locally. So unlike the things that get the attention of the Secretary, these are things that are bought at 100 places across the government.
All right, and there's another big difference between the two. It involves planning. You write, program offices within each of the military departments that GAO met with maintain data on current and estimated future spending needs for contracted service requirements, but they did not identify service contract spending needs beyond the next year. So the Pentagon only plans service contracts 1 year in advance. That's incredible. It takes the Pentagon a year or more to do just about anything. Why are they short-sighted in this particular arena?
Well, Morris, I think that's the heart of the issue. When you think about, from a historical perspective, that DoD spends a lot of time on weapons, not as much on services. 10 years ago, we issued a report that said the major thing that confronts DoD in improving service acquisitions was the inability to know what we're spending today on services, what we're going to be spending 5 years in the future, and whether or not the road to get there was the right path to take. And so we went out and took a look at what is known today about the services that we're buying, not only now, but in the future. And so, as you said, we went out to the program offices, those folks in the field, and asked them, well, what do you know about the services that you need to make your mission successful? And in some ways, not surprising, they actually had pretty good information. They knew what the services were, not only for this year, but in the out years. Now, the fascinating thing is no one at the Pentagon ever asked them for that information. So while the planning did go on at the local levels, not any information was being flowed up to the Pentagon so they can make more strategic decisions across the board.
Tim, you discovered that some military departments are starting to catch on, but they're not on the same page. Explain.
Well, each of the military departments recognize the fact that they need to do a better job in identifying what their spending on services are going to be in the future. And so they have each taken a path, but an approach to get that information. Probably the Navy was taking the most comprehensive approach by really trying to invest in services into their standard budgeting processes, where the Air Force and the Army less so. So we had a recommendation in both cases that would to both get better information and to help the services make more sense of what they're doing by recommending that DoD change their policies and regulations to capture the data that's already known at the program offices, and because each of the services do things a little bit differently, form a working group. Get folks together who have interest and expertise and figure out what makes sense, not only for the individual military departments, but for the department as a whole.
Tim, in about a half a minute before you go, give us some context here. Why are these findings important? Why should the average viewer care?
Well, you know, DoD spends about $150 billion a year on services, and they just don't do it very well. If you have that data available in front of you, you can make better decisions. In the private sector, they save 10 to 20% a year by having better information to make decisions. And if you can save $15 billion, I would call that a good day at the office.
Tim DiNapoli watching all of our taxpayer dollars. Thanks for being with us from the GAO.